All right. And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Leadership Live. I'm here with my co-host, JJ Hardy, and me, Chris Pienkowski, coming to you live, talking about all things leadership, giving people some nuggets that they can take back and use in real time to help themselves, help their teams, help their organizations, and get the most out of things. JJ, how you doing this week?
Man, I could complain, or maybe I should, but people don't typically listen to that. It's a good day. I feel blessed, and I'm probably better than I deserve.
All right. Nice. I feel you there, man. Like no one listens to the complaints.
No.
It's
I even tell my kids, man, okay, you're complaining, but what's the solution?
That's right. That's right. You're going to bring me a problem, bring me a solution right on with it.
Yes. There's a conversation right there.
Yes. I just had that conversation with someone this week. So it's an important part of leadership.
It is.
One of the other important parts of leadership that a lot of people, I think, don't talk about that much, but it creates a roadblock when you're not talking about it or really conscious of it, is our topic this week, which is ego. That 3-letter word I have seen derail too many people to even count.
Yep.
So, we're going to talk today about ego, how it affects you from a leadership standpoint. I think we're also going to get into how to harness it to get the most out of your leadership. But, I'm going to let you kick it off. Thoughts on ego from a leadership standpoint?
It wasn't even intentional. We've had it planned out for a while, but I actually had an ego versus super ego conversation on Wednesday with my therapist friend.
And super ego.
Well, so ego is, what causes you to want to feel a certain sort of way about yourself and how your opinion may or may not be more important than somebody else's, but you project that it is.
Yep.
And when we talk about super ego, that's having the strong emotional intelligence to be able to squash that and put on your servant leader hat and go out there and, lead with the best intentions of everybody else while delegating and trusting and doing all those wonderful things. So that when I think of ego, it's usually a negative thing, but you got to look at what the underlying conditions are for that, because you can help somebody through those problems.
I would say that 98% of people, when they hear the word ego, their mind automatically goes to the negative.
Correct.
That because, we've both probably seen it in different aspects of life, how people's ego just gets in the way.
Yep.
Right. Gets in the way of progress, gets in the way of the way that you communicate, the way that you're hearing what someone else has to say. And it affects outcomes.
Yes.
Right. The ego is powerful, and we all have it. Every living person has an ego. And, it's just part of our makeup. But yeah, it's often viewed in the negative.
So what's one way, in your opinion, that I'd like to hear what you have to say about that? I mean, put a positive spin on it. I want to hear it.
Yeah. So, the ego, and it's been so long since I've had a psychology class. So when you brought up super ego, that was like, man, flashback to
Freud.
Right. Yeah. Like more than 20 years ago. But one of the things that we have to kind of fight with our ego, because a lot of times, in order for someone to really be a leader, in order for someone to be an entrepreneur, right? Especially an entrepreneur, right? You've got to have that ego. You've got to have that level of self-confidence. And I think the ego gives you, but at the same time, you have to subordinate your ego so that you're coming across as relatable to people, so that you're able to hear other people's perspective on things. And it does require a certain amount of emotional intelligence to say, all right, let me get out of my own head and let me hear what someone else has to say here. But on the flip side, we can use, the someone else's ego to really help our own agendas. And, I've talked about this with some people before, where if you've got a problematic employee, let's just say problematic, someone who is constantly pushing back, they think that they know a better way to do something. Well, you know what? You as the leader, you can appeal to their ego and their sense of knowing, quote unquote, knowing more than you, and saying, okay, I've got this list of things. I'm going to assign one of these things to you, and I'm going to play up to your ego, right? I'm going to say, hey, JJ, I need your help with this. You are the only person right now that can help me to get this off my plate, and I trust you to do it. What's that do to your ego?
Oh, man. Well, it's either going to boost it or you're going to humble the crap out of that person.
Right. Right.
Oh, man, I wish I wouldn't have opened my mouth on that one.
That's right. So it's either going to be a lesson learned, or it's going to be that person, they're going to puff up their chest and be like, yeah, you know what? Chris thinks that I'm the guy that can do this, and I'm going to knock it out of the park. I'm going to show him that I'm as knowledgeable as I say that I am.
Yeah, you're right. I do think, though, that it's important to have the conversation with your teams, even if they're not managers or supervisors or directors, depending on what your level is in your organization. There's a difference between confidence and ego. And really, when people have an ego, they have to address that and fix that, especially if their aspirations are to become that leader. Because oftentimes those people that are high achievers and they have that big ego, sometimes that can be confused with just anxiety to want to do more so they can prove themselves to people. And, confidence on the other side, if you use Chris's example, use that anxiety, use that ego, use that energy that a person has and give them some work, because when you get rid of the ego and you build confidence in that person, that is built with experience.
Mm-hmm.
And once that person becomes experienced, if they're really the type of person that wants to move up the chain, then you got to develop that emotional intelligence and all that other stuff. Make sure you're having conversations around all those things so that when they step into your shoes, or maybe a supervisor position just under you, that the people that they lead aren't going to be struggling with somebody who is putting their ideals and everything that they want to do first. Because the whole idea of it all is to make sure you're putting the welfare and the needs of your subordinates before your own. That's servant leadership.
Exactly. You bring up confidence, and as it relates to ego, we often talk about there's a fine line between cocky and confident.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times I think that cocky is more aligned with massive ego.
Massive.
Yeah. And confidence in the way that you carry yourself, like, yeah, I know my stuff, but at the same time, I'm bringing people along with me, right? You can have the same swagger, right? You can be that person, but it's all in the approach. It's all in the way that your language, your body language, and especially the collaboration that comes with it, right? A confident person wants to bring others along. A cocky person wants that spotlight on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a difference. And, honestly, the best leaders that I've ever had, though they are confident when they need to be, most times you would never know that they're a subject matter expert in something.
Yeah.
because they don't go out and exemplify that. They when you need them, they are there, and they will show that expertise by helping you through your issues. But otherwise, they're humble and kind and supportive,
Yep.
which is, I wish more of the civilian workforce was that way, because that's servant leadership as a whole right there. But 9 times out of 10, what happens is people are caught up in the idea that they need to be secure in their job. And so as a result of that, they hold way too much close to the chest, and they
Yep.
don't let anybody in the workplace comment on anything that's in their lane. As a matter of fact, they try to shut people up oftentimes, and I think that's where the ego comes in. And when you put it that way, that's an underlying issue, is that they are afraid. And that in this case, they're afraid of job security. Well, what happens if that person has major trust issues as an individual? That ego is going to show up, but it's not going to be for the same reason.
Right.
And that just means I won't delegate. There are so many reasons that, ego shows up, and don't think it's because somebody is just over cocky. That could be what they show on the outside. But really, when you have a conversation with somebody who shows that big ego, and I'm not talking about super ego, because that's just the opposite. But when they show that big ego, pull them off to the side, have a conversation with them, be like, hey man, or hey female, I don't know how you would address.
Right.
Hey,
you.
Hey, you. What's really going on here? You're not willing to trust Joe Snuffy over there as your supervisor to go do what he has to do. But then again, I hear you complaining about how you're always having to do everybody's job for him. Get underneath that initial layer, away from everybody else, because otherwise that ego is going to come back out again, and it's going to be in a very angry or defensive way. And really help them address that. As, by the way, when you're a servant leader, that's how you handle everything. You don't look at something as negative. You try to address it and solve the problem in the most gentle way possible. Sometimes some people need some blunt force, but you can usually be pretty gentle.
Yeah. And that's a really good, what you just said about have that conversation away from the team, right? Those one-on-one conversations are oftentimes where someone lets that shield down, right? And when you can subordinate your ego, right, as the leader, as the peer, right? So I want to couch this not just from a top down, leading teams, but this is also where you show up as a leader amongst your peers.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you can, I'm going to use Joe Snuffy because we like to beat up on Joe Snuffy a lot.
Oh yeah, man.
So
18 years in the military, you better believe I beat up on Joe Snuffy.
Yeah. So if Joe and I are on a team and I see that something's flaring up on him, I want to bring him off to the side and subordinate my own ego, right? Show him that I'm letting my guard down, not through the words that I use, but through the actions that I'm demonstrating. It's going to help him to bring his guard down and for us to have that conversation and get to the root level, right? We want to get away from the surface level crap and get down to the root and figure out like, hey man, what is going on here? Like, hey Joe, you're like extra fired up today. What's going on? But yeah, so I don't want to just couch this conversation in a leader subordinate framework, right? Because that's one of the we have to help our peers as well.
Yeah.
And that's another time that it's tough from the ego standpoint, because when you're both at the same level, if you're both competitive people, if you're both kind of high performers, you both have a certain level of ego, it has to be up to you to subordinate yours first in order for them to say, all right, we're lowering the guards here and we're having a conversation.
Well, and it's more than that, right? So that's not, so that's servant leadership, right? It is, but it's more than that. So there's a word that comes to mind, and it's probably because of the NCO creed, the non-commissioned officers creed from the military, but loyalty comes to mind. There's a phrase within the NCO creed that says, "I'll be loyal to those with whom I serve, seniors, peers, and subordinates alike."
Okay.
Well, when you think about that phrase and you think about loyalty, you know, really anybody, whether they're senior to you, your peer, or they're subordinate to you, when there's something going on and they are having an issue, it should never be couched, as you say. You gotta take the opportunity. Maybe if they're upset at that moment or something like that, it's not necessarily the right time, but you find an opportunity to get in there and have a one-on-one conversation with somebody when they're having ego issues, or maybe they're having a mental health outbreak or something like that, so that you can help get rid of those stigmas and address it. Let them know, hey, look, yeah, you may have a big ego, or you may be having a struggle with something right now, but we're all here for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with your boss too, because guess what? I will tell you, from a senior leader standpoint, growing up in the ranks and being a leader outside of the military as well, some of the most senior people in your organization, though they may look confident, they struggle worse than some of the people that are down on the ground doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so true. Like, there's a leading up component to this.
Yep.
And, for those of you who are watching, who are looking at that next level, you being able to go have that conversation with your direct boss and, kind of making them feel at ease and helping them to understand that, hey, I see that there seems to be a challenge here, and I want to be part of the solution to that challenge. Leaders carry so much on their shoulders, and they feel as though they need to kind of protect their people from that stress, right? Good leaders feel as though they need to shield people. Bad leaders hold that stuff in because they have part of a martyr syndrome, right? And it's like, oh, I'm going to take the brunt of this because I'm whatever. But I think it's just natural for leaders to want to shield their people from negative stuff. And if you're trying to move up the ranks, letting your boss know that, hey, I want to be part of a solution here. How can I help you? That's also going to help to bring that guard down, and for your boss to say, oh, you know what? I've got something on my list that I would love to delegate to you. Bring it. Let's go.
So, that brings up another complete topic, and that's difficult conversations, which I just looked. We haven't even had that conversation yet.
No, we haven't.
But with that aside, just consider the social responsibility you have to make sure that people are okay. If you think about that, it doesn't matter if it's the owner of the company or the forklift driver. People all have different experiences in their life, and it leads to mental health issues, which, people don't like to talk about those things because there's a stigma out there that's a bad thing. Well, guess what? Life is full of people that challenge us, whether it's in a good way or a bad way. And there are situations out there that sometimes we have difficulty handling, and that social responsibility to, by the way, put your ego aside and have a conversation with somebody and help them through the struggles. I mean, you want to be a mentor for somebody. You can be a mentor for somebody who's senior, subordinate, or junior to you. And that could just be because you're that person that wants to be there for them.
Yep.
And that, whether or not that ever gets you promoted, I mean, that could be a motivation for you, but really it's part of being a good human being. And when you think of a business A business is nothing more than a group of people coming together to get a job done. And when you put it that way, the tasks and statistics don't really matter as much as the people who are out there making stuff happen. So
Right.
always keep that in mind. I think that's the biggest thing that most people miss, that caused them to lead from their office, or to want their job security, or all of these other things. You got to keep the people in mind first, and the job will always get done.
Yeah, absolutely. But the flip side, we've been talking a lot about kind of subordinating our own ego in order to support others.
Yep.
But there is a time that you as a leader need to tap into the energy of your own ego to move things forward. Like, hey, if you're stuck, right, in the absence of leadership, you must step up to lead.
Yes.
And that requires you to utilize your ego in a lot of times.
Yep.
So, when everybody's kind of banging their head on the wall and we're stuck here and we don't know what to do, then you know what? Tap into that ego and say, all right, everybody, let's stop for a second. Let's pause. And you need to direct the action. And that's going to come from a combination of your confidence, combination of your experience, and bringing your ego into play to be the big personality in the room, in the team, whatever it is, to break through something in order to move forward.
That's true. Even if that means once you have everybody there, you subordinate that a little bit.
Yes.
And I think ego creates that. The word that came to mind for me was personal courage. And that courage sometimes is what a lot of other people lack. And whatever you have to tap into to make that happen, whether it's your confidence, whether it's your ego, whether it's your undying need to make sure things go right, it doesn't really matter what you got to tap into. When you're a leader, you have to go out there and lead from the front. You got to say something about it, gather the troops, so to speak, and have a conversation around the issues that are going on so that you can come up with a solution. The worst thing you could possibly do when something needs to be addressed is to just let it go.
Right.
That's not stepping up at all. And by the way, when it comes to ownership, like we've talked about before, that is a complete and utter lack of ownership.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if it's because it's fear or whatever the case may be. You got to put all that aside to make sure things are getting done, because you have a lot of people looking for your guidance. And if your guidance is just let it slide, that's probably not the only thing that's going to be sliding, buddy. It's there's going to be a lot of mistakes and stuff like that happening on your team. So own it, step up, use your ego, use your confidence, whatever it takes, but always do the I always say, take the hard right, not the easy left.
Yeah. I like that. But that's so true. At the end of the day, you're in a leadership role in order to provide guidance, to provide direction, to provide purpose, motivation. And that's what your team is looking to you for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you can't provide those things when you're just sweeping things under the carpet.
No.
Because before you know it, you're creating speed bumps within that carpet that are going to become so big that getting over them is going to, the ripple effects of those speed bumps in the carpet are going to really impede efficiency, effectiveness, and just the team's cohesion.
Yep. The very first leadership course that I ever went through, the motto that when we would get up there and have our formation, as soon as they would call attention, we would snap to attention and say, by example. Well, why is by example so important? Because everyone is watching you. So if you take the lazy way out, they're going to see that. And that's an ownership issue.
Yep.
And it's more than that. It's a motivation. It's in all kinds of things. But if you want to stay in your role and do any good with it, you have to figure out how to knock that. And ego can actually cause a lack of action as well. And after that lack of action happens, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, why did you do that? Or why didn't we do this? You snap.
Right.
And you turn into this jerk that nobody wants to deal with.
Right. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever personally experienced this. I have, where, early in my leadership journey, when I was a young idiot, I've let my ego get in the way. I remember crystal clear. I was put in charge of a team that boss was let go, and there was no one else in the organization qualified to step up. I was already leading a different team, so I was kind of now leading two teams. This team that I took over was so underperforming, and I came in there, and I'm used to the team that I was leading, and we were kicking butt and taking names. So I come in, and this team's like, they're punching the clock at 9 to 5 and, missing half their deadlines. But I remember in one meeting, everyone was supposed to come in with something prepared, whatever, and nobody did. And my response was fist on the table, like, I don't understand what's wrong with you people, why you can't come to these meetings prepared. I'm leaving now, and you let me know when you're ready to meet. And I walked out the door. And that was the absolute wrong thing to do.
Yep.
And I look at that as one of my failures of leadership. And I think everyone can draw on stories of when they have failed as leaders. That's one that often stands in my mind as like one of the biggest. I could have had an impact there, but instead I let my ego get in the way. Maybe I didn't set the right expectations. I probably didn't set the right expectations. But just storming out and allowing my temper to take over, because these people were used to a softy of a boss who was like, oh, you didn't get it done for 3 weeks in a row. Let's see if you get it done next week. That's why that guy was fired, right? That's one of the reasons that this guy was fired. So, yeah, it was all around shit show.
Yep.
And I contributed to that.
Well, I have a similar situation, and I know we're almost at the end here, but if you don't mind, I'd like to share it just because, we may talk a big game, but we've all made our mistakes in our past. And I think it's important to not only address those mistakes and say them out loud, but, be vulnerable enough to let people know that though we may have been able to help a lot of people through things, we've made our mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
So when I was stationed at Fort Lewis, I'm not going to put any names out there, but I had a gentleman who he was actually in a leadership position who was working for me. And I had a team. It was just a small team because I worked in a staff, about 4 people. And he was the only one on my team that would set meetings to do convoy pre-inspections and do a bunch of things that needed to happen so that when these teams of people that took about 30 to 40 vehicles out on the road wouldn't get in trouble with the law and, wouldn't call me or my commander or the battalion commander, so to speak. And, there was one day that he came in when I knew he was supposed to be at a convoy inspection in the main office with the entire support operations staff right there. And he came up to me, and I was so mad that I didn't say anything. I said, please I know you're supposed to be over there doing this inspection, and I don't know why you're here, but you need to go there now. He started walking away. He got about 5 steps away, and I don't remember what the comment was, but it was a snarky one. And I screamed it. I said, how about this? You get the F out of here right now and do what you're supposed to do or you're fired. And I screamed it. And by the way, that was the only time that entire staff had ever seen me upset. And what do you think that did to my reputation for the next couple of days?
You were the screamer.
I was the screamer. And if
Right.
you can't control if you can't control your attitude, then you can really control nothing.
Right.
And that's ownership. So
Yep.
we've all made our mistakes, but it's how we learn and move on from those mistakes is what really matters. And yeah, that was a doozy. I was pulled directly into the support operations, the senior guy. I was pulled into his office, and it was a friendly conversation, but it was very pointed.
Okay.
You will not do that again, and this is why.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
But yes, I agree. Now, ego is just not one of those things you want to let take you over. And, really, that old saying that you probably used to hear from your mom, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Probably the wisest words when it comes to ego that you could ever hear.
That's right. With that, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up for today?
No, I'll let you do the whole like and subscribe and all that crap. I'll let you say all that. But no, I just think that, make sure you keep a level head, study emotional intelligence, study, Freud's id versus ego versus super ego, and learn how that applies to leadership, because I think you're going to find that you grow as a person just from learning these concepts.
100% agree. There's a balance for everything, right? That's the dichotomy of leadership, right? You and I have talked about that before.
Yep.
Time to subordinate your ego and put the spotlight on others, time to activate it and, break through barriers when you need to. And you have to understand when those things are applicable.
Yes.
But it's definitely something that, is way more than a 30-minute conversation. But, hopefully people got some nuggets out of this that they're able to take back and apply in real time. That's why we do these leadership lives every other Friday, to just share nuggets that people are able to take back and use in real time to help make themselves better leaders, to help get better performance out of their team, help move their organizations forward. So if you like this episode, if you got something out of this episode, please like it, please share it, comment. We will continue to keep this conversation going in the comments. So if you're watching it on a replay, you can also comment, and one of us will chime in and, share some perspective.
That's
so
right.
From me and JJ, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again in 2 weeks for another Leadership Live.
Indeed.
Have an awesome weekend.
Out here.